I'm going to read out aloud now a review, an article in my little zine, the Aleph, waiting issue for quite a while. I wrote this a couple of years ago. This is a piece I wrote on the Police's Ghost in the Machine of 1981. So let's start here. Here we go. I used to have contempt for the police and police fans. I think I still do, but not to the same extent. I don't know, something about the whole thinking person's new wave really rubbed me as pretentious and banal. Obviously, this horridly smug press is not the band's fault, but Sting's reputation is certainly his own fault, and no post-Gen X music geeks could ever be blamed for not exploring the police. Ew, Sting? Yuck! Arguably, Genesis were inflicted with the same hesitation owing to Phil Collins, but the whole, but the Peter Gabriel era thing hinted at a degree of former credibility which the police seemed to, at this glance, lack. Even with the contemporary millennial adoration for new wave, mixed with a predictable disdain for 1970s progressive rock excess, it is still very easy to imagine the police being dismissed or derided as dad rock. The police certainly had a vaguely rockist, masculine vibe about them as opposed to the more boyish or nerdy auras of other male-dominated new wave bands. Perhaps this is why Rolling Stone magazine, the purveyor of rockism as we know it today, seemed to fillet the police so enthusiastically compared to their relative dismissals or de facto dismissals of XTC, Devo, Japan, or Oingo Boingo. Still, it isn't as though the trendier publications, such as Enemy, Pitchfork, Melody Maker, et al., have chosen to completely snub the police either, at least that's not the impression I have ever gained. They aren't treated as though they are Huey Lewis in the News, Men at Work, or Duran Duran. They aren't necessarily defended of that slight apprehension which appears to hover over praise for U2, which I also feel due to their music putting me to sleep before I ever have a chance to enjoy it. Heck, mentioning Genesis earlier, it is so much more feasible to imagine Police albums being championed before Duke, Abacab, Shapes, or Invisible Touch. Not that anyone should be championing Invisible Touch, see, not wanting to be like Patrick Bateman, ostensibly. And so inevitably, me being someone who does not enjoy disliking music, I try to become acquainted with the welcomingly short Police studio discography. I firstly would like to acknowledge that these albums contain songs which frequently change their time signatures. This is often cited by police devotees, and especially the fact that one wouldn't even notice. Mate, if I don't enjoy a song, I don't enjoy a song. There are such things as irrelevant muso-trivialities. Message in a Bottle can have as many time signatures as it likes. It's still Message in a Bottle. Every Breath You Take can have as dark as lyrics as it wants. It's still the most insufferable rock hit of the entire 1980s, which didn't involve Grace Slick, inexplicably enough. That being said, any song that can rhyme, that book by Nabokov, and still be one of the more recognizable singles of the late 20th century is great to my ears. I shan't refer to this piece as a discussion on the police discography proper, because that would be far too painful, but I'd love to briefly touch upon their other studio releases in order to supplement a more substantial description of 1981's Ghost in the Machine. Atlantis D'Amour sounds like British white reggae/ska punk rock mixed with that American power pop. I kind of hate it, but it's not that bad. I certainly do hate that whole back to basics thing which a lot of rock groups were attempting at this time. The fact of the matter is, rock wasn't really all that interesting until the Beatles thought that the elevator was on fire. The psychedelic and progressive eras were some of the most colourful in recording music history, and their dismissal as overblown and inaccessible rings dimly true, although its outright replacement with this back-to-basics rock really makes me question how much there is to life. I mean, if the peak of my day is listening to some corny traditional rock band, drinking a cheap beer, eating some hot meal, what's the bloody point? I'd prefer an illusion of transcendence, thank you very much. Regarded de Blanc is more of the same, with improved songwriting ability and stronger production. Thanks, Nigel Gray. Señada Mondada sought to acknowledge the sunnier horizons over the American market, and their determined willpower to explore the effectiveness of upbeat tempos did them well here. Not a terrific album, but hardly terrible. Stuart Copeland was always a phenomenal talent, one of the very best drummers to ever record in a pop/rock context. I wish he could have collaborated with someone like Jeff Porcaro or even Phil Collins. Oh, they did pull on Phil. They were able to acquire Hugh Padgham to produce for them. Padgham and Copeland is percussive production heaven. It is said that for this Ghost in the Machine, Hugh Padgham initiated a peculiar recording technique in which the band were playing simultaneously in separate rooms of the studio facilities. A poppier album than prior, and jumping on the then bandwagon of keyboards and horn sections, the Police were genuinely attempting to expand upon their, in my opinion, trite sound and explore uncharted territories. To traditionalist bore Andy Summers, this was not on. I have to say I was getting disappointed with the musical direction around the time of Ghost in the Machine, with the horns and synth coming in, the fantastic raw trio feel, all the really creative and dynamic stuff, was being lost. We were ending up backing a singer doing his pop songs. One point of disagreement, one point of agreement. On the contention, musically, the Police's brand of rock music was for Weather Report fans who hadn't heard Weather Report yet. It really just wasn't that great a sound, to my ears anyhow. As far as pop songwriting goes, I haven't an enormous amount to praise either on their first 3 LPs. But on to the agreement, well, somewhat in agreement. Yes, they, Summers and Copeland, ended up, Ghost in the Machine, backing a singer doing his pop songs, but hey, for a short time, they were fantastic pop songs. Sting at one time actually recorded music with tempos. The banal raucous trite was just that, but the more synth-pop flavoured audiophile porn of Ghost in the Machine allowed for the only truly interesting composition Sting ever penned. Sting's turn to slow, uninteresting adult contemporary is up for him to grapple with on his mountain of money and drugs. Hell, he's so boring he's probably only ever been addicted to painkillers or prescription meds or something. That's a sick joke. Addiction is really not cool, but it just might have made Sting cooler. Andy Summers is now a noted veteran of that really boring jazz fusion CD scene / market / catalogue, which no one interesting or fun likes and enjoys. Copeland obviously went on to compose music for Francis Ford Coppola's Rumblefish, was ejected from scoring Babylon 5 after internet fan backlash in 1993, seriously, and is celebrated today for recording the music of the original Spyro trilogy of pretty PlayStation distractions. Now, I shall engage in a brief track-by-track for Ghost in the Machine, as I feel as though that this will be the most effective way to communicate my feelings toward this album as a whole. There is no political solution. What a way to open an 80s pop track, hey? There is no bloody revolution. How Beatles-esque, I suppose. I don't know, they, and all of us, are just spirits living in the material world. One of the coolest and most enthusiastically imaginative opening tracks of the 1980s. Every little thing she does is magic. Have you ever accidentally fallen in love with a traffic controller before you realised she wasn't single? One attempts to politely fall out of love, but isn't nearly as easy as that initial romantic stumble. Because every little thing she does is magic. Holy fuck, I remember when I wrote this. It really assists in my appreciation for this tune. Following this is the delightfully ominous Invisible Sun, one of those moody new wave numbers, and one which was actually released as the initial single from this LP. Hungry for You appears to sonically recall the 1981 masterpiece LP Nightclubbing from Grace Jones and producers Chris Blackwell and Alex Sadkin, but not nearly as much as the next cut, Demolition Man. Grace Jones had requested Sting write a song for her Nightclubbing album. The recording sessions of Nightclubbing, owing to the commercial disappointment of the disco determinism of Jones's previous muse, were aiming for a soundscape that was irrefutably post-disco. Dance music still being the goal, taking inspiration from the still trending new wave acts was only apt. In response to her request, Sting sent Jones a demo of Demolition Man. She subsequently recorded a version of this song for Nightclubbing, and it serves as an exciting highlight of an already infectious, jumping, bumping castle of a pop LP. That being said, the Police arrogantly thought that they could do better and committed themselves to the longest song they ever recorded, at 5 minutes 57 seconds. It's a superb number. Too Much Information comes next. It is a horrifying cliche to bring up an older song as having greater relevance in a contemporary age, early 21st century in our case, although Too Much Information has me shaking my head. Well, think about it. In the very early 80s, the media colossus was expanding, and Sting swiftly composed an admirable pop ditty in response. Now, as my colleague Debord writes, the media colossus is so ubiquitous, commanding the micro-worlds of every individual to seek a perceived quantification of others' approval. No pop ditty is ever going to do that justice. Rehumanize Yourself appears to decry the stiff upper lip mentality manifesting in its contemporary societal surroundings in a UK context. Policemen, factory workers, and the National Front can potentially coalesce. What a vile woe is jaded masculinity. One world is enough for all of us. Don't groan, this is not a bad song at all, fortunately. Sexy saxophones, a pounding percussion, and energetic bass make for a sweet treat. Then Ωmegaman is, in my opinion, and I think Martin Popoff's, the best song ever recorded by the Police. I apologise to Andy Summers, who will definitely hear this, for deriding him earlier, for Ωmegaman is credited as his composition and is the single finest cut of the Police's discography. My only complaint about this song, and it's my own fault, is that I used to hear, "I'm so sad, I'm the Ωmegaman," over the gradual fade out. But no, it's, "I'm so tired, I'm the Ωmegaman." Obviously the Ωmegaman would be tired. What's interesting about that? But how warming is the possibility that for a brief moment, summoning the purely temporal beauty which pop is able to conjure, and is all beauty temporary, one can transfer their own sadness into empathy for the fictional Ωmegaman. And all of a sudden, one's sorrow seems romantic, grand, spectacular, cinematic, and acknowledged. So what comes next? Secret Journey was the fourth single released for the LP and makes the least impact on me out of all of this album's cuts. It begins creepily and ends with a predictable power poppy vocal harmony, which I'm not really inclined towards. Now, Darkness. Almost irresponsible to share the secrets of depression's terrifying lucidity on such a potentially commercially successful LP, but they do so anyway. I mean, Morrissey made a career off of that, and Ian Curtis lines the most acclaimed LPs of his generation with it, but I mean, no one explores that particular kind of dreary music scene by accident. Closing with yet another superb number, Ghost in the Machine stands today as one of the more exciting albums released during the 1980s. Oh, of course, I haven't discussed 1983's Synchronicity. Synchronicity was the most, let's make an album that will follow the formula of a great album and be considered a great album, until The Cure punished his planet with disintegration, though apparently sarcastically, it has been claimed. No great album contains every breath you take. I also feel as though Badgem's production was far less interesting on Synchronicity, strangely enough owing to it seeming/sounding less streamlined, less poppy, and more like a pseudo-art rock. I don't know, leave that bracket to Roxy Music, right? I don't know, man. It is hard to be a Police fan when one is an XTC fan. What is the point of admiring the Police when Partridge and Co. have delivered at least 10 classic albums over the course of 14? I don't know. Sometimes I suspect that one can listen to too much recorded music and therefore prevent themselves from enjoying the more pedestrian, by comparison, Police. I've often said this about contemporary acclaimed music acts such as Radiohead, Interpol, Daft Punk, and Grimes, so one might actually consider the Police to be in good company.